My name is Bridget Stanley, and at 64 years old, I learned that the cruelest betrayals come from the people you gave life to. It was 8:17 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in March when my phone pinged with a message that would change everything forever. I was in my study, reading beside the fireplace in the home I had built with my late husband William. The same home where I had raised our son Darius, where I had nursed William through his final illness, and where I had spent the 2 years since his death learning to live alone with dignity and grace. The message notification showed Darius's name, and I smiled as I reached for my reading glasses. My son rarely texted me directly. Usually, our communication went through his wife Shanice, who managed their social calendar with military precision. Perhaps he was planning something special for my upcoming birthday. What I read instead was a knife through the heart. I can't wait to dump this miserable old woman in the nursing home. Then we'll be rich and can spend all her money in Vegas. The sooner the better. I stared at the screen for exactly 30 seconds, my hands perfectly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Then I did what any intelligent woman with resources and a strong survival instinct would do. I took a screenshot. Then I forwarded the image to my computer, printed 3 copies, and slipped one into my fireproof safe alongside my will, birth certificate, and other documents that define the architecture of my life. The text had clearly been meant for Shanice. A misdirected message between conspirators planning my imprisonment and the theft of everything William and I had spent 40 years building. The $2.8 million estate. The house with its antique furnishings and carefully tended gardens. The investment portfolio that had grown steadily since William's death, overseen by the same financial advisors who had guided us through decades of careful planning. All of it, apparently, was going to fund my son's gambling addiction and his wife's taste for luxury. I set my book aside and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where William and I had planted roses on our 20th wedding anniversary. Those roses were still there, still blooming each spring, still beautiful despite his absence. Unlike some things that claimed permanence but proved fleeting when tested. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, 64 years old, silver hair styled in a perfect chignon, pearl earrings catching the lamplight. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman of substance who had been raised to handle crisis with composure. What I didn't look like was a miserable old woman who would quietly disappear into institutional care so her son could steal her future. They had made a fundamental miscalculation about who they were dealing with. I returned to my desk, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Malcolm Kestrel speaking. Malcolm, it's Bridget. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. We're implementing the contingency plan we discussed last year. There was a pause. Malcolm had been my estate attorney for 15 years, a meticulous man with steel-gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that came from decades of protecting wealthy clients from their own families. The full containment protocol? The full protocol. And Malcolm? This isn't a drill anymore. I'll clear my calendar. 9 a.m. Perfect. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine, a good Bordeaux that William had been saving for a special occasion that never came, and sat down to plan. The text message was just the beginning. If Darius and Shanice thought they could steal from me, they were about to learn what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by someone who had been planning for their betrayal longer than they had been planning to commit it. I had spent 2 years since William's death, not just grieving, but preparing. Updating wills, restructuring assets, and creating legal safeguards that would protect my estate from exactly this kind of family predation. Malcolm had called it defensive estate planning, but tonight I realized it was something more powerful than defense. It was ammunition. At 10:30 p.m., my phone rang. Darius's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom, just calling to check on you." His voice carried that false cheer he used when he wanted something. The same tone he'd used as a teenager when he'd wrecked the car or failed a test and needed my help to fix his problems. How thoughtful, I said, keeping my voice warm and steady. I was just thinking about you. Yeah? That's nice. Hey, Shanice and I were talking, and we think it might be time to start looking at some assisted living places for you. Just to get on waiting lists, you know? Some of these places have long waits. I almost laughed. Less than 2 hours after calling me miserable and planning to steal my money, and he was already starting the sales pitch for my imprisonment. Assisted living? Darius, I'm in perfect health. I drive, I manage my own affairs, I even taught myself to use that investment app last month. I know. It's just that Shanice and I worry about you being all alone in that big house. What if you fell? What if something happened? What if you couldn't steal from me if I had professional caregivers watching my finances, he meant. That's very considerate of you both. Why don't you and Shanice come for dinner this Sunday? We can discuss it properly. That sounds great, Mom. Love you. Love you too, sweetheart. I hung up and immediately called Malcolm back. Sunday dinner, I said when he answered. They're going to present their nursing home proposal. How quickly can we have the documents ready? If you're certain about this path, I can have everything prepared by Friday. I looked at the printed screenshot lying on my desk, the words, miserable old woman, seeming to glow under the lamplight. I'm certain, Malcolm. More certain than I've been about anything since William died. Then we'll give them exactly what they're asking for, just not in the way they expect. After we hung up, I sat in my study for another hour, finishing my wine and watching the fire burn down to embers. Some people might say what I was about to do was cruel, vindictive, or excessive. They might argue that family should forgive, that blood should matter more than money, that a mother should show mercy to her only child. Those people had never been called a miserable old woman by the baby they had rocked to sleep, the child they had sacrificed for, the man they had raised to be better than this. There are two kinds of mothers in this world, those who beg for love, and those who build consequences for betrayal. I put the kettle on and began to plan exactly how those consequences would unfold. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp spring air that William had always loved. I woke at 6, as I had every day for the past 40 years, and prepared for battle with the same precision I had once used to prepare for charity galas and board meetings. By 8:30 a.m., I was sitting in Malcolm Kestrel's conference room, wearing my navy St. John suit and my grandmother's pearls. If I was going to destroy my son's life, I would do it looking like the formidable woman William had married. Malcolm arrived with coffee and a legal pad covered in his neat handwriting. At 61, he was the kind of lawyer who had built his practice on discretion, strategy, and an absolute commitment to protecting his clients' interests, even when those interests conflicted with conventional notions of family loyalty. I've been thinking about your situation all night, he said, settling behind his desk. Before we proceed, I need to ask, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of Darius's text message. Malcolm read it twice, his expression growing colder with each word. Miserable old woman. Dump you in a nursing home. Spend all her money in Vegas. He set the phone down carefully. I rescind my question about certainty. Good. What do we need to do? Malcolm opened a thick folder and spread documents across the conference table. First, we need to understand what we're protecting. Your liquid assets total approximately $2.8 million, split between investment accounts, CDs, and savings. The house is worth $1.2 million, fully paid. You have art, jewelry, and collectibles worth perhaps another $400,000. I nodded. William and I had been careful savers, and his life insurance had provided a substantial cushion for my widowhood. The challenge, Malcolm continued, is that much of this is still held in ways that could potentially be challenged by a determined heir, especially if they can demonstrate incompetency or undue influence. Which is exactly what they'll try to do once they realize I'm not going quietly into their nursing home. Exactly. So we need to restructure everything in ways that are completely legal, properly documented, and absolutely unbreakable. Over the next 2 hours, we outlined a comprehensive strategy. First, we would revoke any existing powers of attorney and replace them with new documents naming Malcolm as my agent, with very specific instructions about nursing home placement that would require multiple medical opinions and court approval. Second, we would move the majority of my assets into an irrevocable trust with a spendthrift clause, making it impossible for creditors or greedy heirs to access the principal. The trust would provide for my care and comfort during my lifetime, with any remainder going to charities I selected. Third, and most importantly for what I was planning, we would create a controlled access account with very specific usage rules. This is the key to your strategy, Malcolm explained. We'll call it a legacy gift account. You'll transfer a substantial amount, say $500,000, into an account that Darius and Shanice can access, but only with significant restrictions. What kind of restrictions? Travel and experiences only. No cash withdrawals. No transfers to other accounts. No third-party payments. Every transaction logged and reported. And most importantly, any violation of these terms results in immediate forfeiture of all remaining funds. I smiled. So, if they try to steal from it, they lose everything, and we have documented evidence of their intent to defraud you. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would give them exactly what they wanted. Access to my money, but on terms that would expose their true intentions and provide grounds for criminal prosecution if they violated the agreement. How quickly can this be implemented? I can have the initial documents ready by Friday. The account setup will take a few more days. But Bridget, I need to warn you, once we start this process, there's no going back. You'll be setting a trap for your own son. I thought about the text message, about years of subtle manipulation and growing entitlement, about Shanice's calculating eyes and Darius's casual cruelty. Malcolm, they set this trap the moment they decided to call me a miserable old woman and plan to steal my money for gambling trips. I'm just making sure it springs shut. After leaving Malcolm's office, I made one more crucial stop. Monique Duval had been my private banker for 8 years, a sharp woman in her 50s who managed high-net-worth clients with the kind of attention to detail that came from understanding exactly how wealthy people's money could be stolen by their own families. "Mrs. Stanley," she said, welcoming me into her office. Malcolm Kestrel called ahead. He mentioned you might need some specialized account monitoring. I need to set up what he's calling a legacy gift account, but with some very specific compliance features. Monique leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. What kind of features? I want every transaction flagged and preserved. I want any attempts at structuring or circumventing the usage restrictions immediately reported to your compliance department. And I want a paper trail that would satisfy federal prosecutors if this ever goes to court. Monique's eyebrows rose. Federal prosecutors? Mrs. Stanley, are you expecting criminal activity? I'm expecting my son and his wife to show me who they really are when they think they have access to my money. I see. And if they engage in activities that violate the account terms, then I want you to have everything documented for law enforcement. Every violation, every attempt to circumvent restrictions, every lie they tell about the source of funds. Monique made notes on her pad. This is highly unusual, but completely legal. We can set up the account with automatic compliance monitoring. Any suspicious activity will generate reports that are preserved for law enforcement access. Perfect. How soon can this be operational? By early next week. But Mrs. Stanley, I have to ask, are you certain about this approach? Once money starts moving through monitored accounts and compliance flags start being generated, there's no stopping the machinery if violations occur. I stood and smoothed my skirt. Monique, some people think rules are suggestions. I'm about to teach 2 people that rules are consequences. That evening, I called Darius to confirm Sunday dinner and casually mentioned that I had been thinking about our conversation. I've been considering your suggestion about assisted living, I said. And I've been thinking about ways to share more of your inheritance while I'm still alive to enjoy watching you benefit from it. The silence on the other end was telling. Then, that's wonderful, Mom. Really generous. I thought you'd approve. We'll discuss the details on Sunday. After hanging up, I poured myself another glass of William's wine and sat in his chair by the fireplace. The trap was almost set. By Sunday, Darius and Shanice would think they were one step closer to accessing my money and getting me out of their way. Instead, they would be one step closer to federal prison. Some people call it revenge. I called it education. They were about to learn that underestimating a 64-year-old woman was the most expensive mistake of their lives. The only question was how long it would take them to hang themselves with the rope I was about to hand them. Sunday dinner preparations began at noon. I had chosen the menu carefully. Roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, William's favorite meal, served on the Wedgwood china we had received as a wedding gift. If I was going to offer my son and his wife the bait that would destroy them, I wanted the setting to be perfect. Darius and Shanice arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, both dressed in a kind of expensive casual wear that suggested prosperity while hinting at financial need. Shanice's handbag was a $3,000 designer piece that I remembered her admiring but claiming she couldn't afford. Apparently, their budget had room for luxury accessories, but not for their own housing. They had been living in a rented condo since their mortgage application was denied last year. "Mom, you look wonderful," Darius said, kissing my cheek with a kind of perfunctory affection that barely disguised his impatience. "Thank you, sweetheart." "Shanice, that's a beautiful bag." "Oh, this old thing?" Shanice's laugh was too bright, too casual. "I found it at a consignment shop." The first lie of the evening. I had seen her post photos of the purchase on social media, tagged at the boutique where she'd bought it full price. During dinner, I let them guide the conversation toward my living situation, nodding thoughtfully as they painted increasingly urgent pictures of the dangers I faced living alone. "The thing is, Mom," Darius said, cutting his roast beef with surgical precision, "accidents happen so quickly at our age, at your age. Shanice's grandmother fell in her kitchen and lay there for 12 hours before anyone found her." "How terrifying," I murmured. "I suppose that's why you're both so concerned about my welfare." "Exactly," Shanice chimed in. "We've actually been looking at some facilities, just preliminary research. There are some lovely places that are more like luxury hotels than nursing homes." "How thoughtful of you to research options for me." They exchanged glances, the kind of quick communication that happens between conspirators who think they're being clever. "The thing is," Darius continued, "the really nice places have waiting lists. Some are 2 or 3 years long. So, even if you're not ready now, it makes sense to get your name on some lists." I set down my fork and looked at them both with the expression of dawning understanding that they were clearly hoping to see. You're absolutely right. I have been feeling more fragile lately. Just yesterday, I had trouble remembering where I put my car keys. This was completely untrue. My memory was as sharp as ever, but they both leaned forward with barely concealed excitement. "Really?" Shanice's voice dripped with false concern. "That must be frightening for you." "It is. And I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, Darius. About sharing your inheritance while I'm still alive to enjoy seeing you benefit from it." The silence that followed was electric. I could practically see dollar signs reflecting in their eyes. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Darius asked carefully. I let my hand tremble slightly as I reached for my water glass, a theatrical touch that wasn't lost on them. "Well, I've been speaking with Malcolm about restructuring my estate. He suggested something called a legacy gift arrangement. I would transfer a substantial amount, perhaps $500,000, into an account that you could access for travel and experiences." Things that would enrich your lives while I'm still here to share in your joy. Shanice nearly choked on her wine. $500,000? To start with, yes. If the arrangement works well, there could be more. Darius's eyes had taken on the glassy look of a man calculating odds and payouts. That's incredibly generous, Mom. There would be some restrictions, of course. The money would need to be used for travel, experiences, things that create memories. No cash withdrawals, no transfers to other accounts. Malcolm insists on proper documentation to protect everyone involved. Of course, Shanice said quickly. That makes perfect sense. The wonderful thing is that it would give you both the freedom to take those trips you've always dreamed about. Europe, perhaps. Or Las Vegas, since I know you both enjoy the entertainment there. The mention of Las Vegas hit them like an electric shock. They tried to hide their reaction, but 42 years of motherhood had taught me to read Darius's face like a book. Las Vegas does sound fun, he said, attempting casualness and failing completely. I thought you might think so. Malcolm will have the documents ready by Wednesday. We can all meet to sign the paperwork and set up the account. After they left, with significantly more enthusiasm than they'd arrived with, I called Malcolm. The hook is baited, I told him. And they took it? Like starving fish. They're already planning their Vegas spending spree. Excellent. I've been coordinating with some contacts in federal law enforcement. Once they start violating the account terms, which they inevitably will, we'll have multiple agencies ready to move. Multiple agencies? FBI for wire fraud and money laundering. IRS for financial crimes. Nevada Gaming Control for any casino-related violations. This kind of scheme typically crosses multiple jurisdictions, which gives us more tools to work with. I smiled, settling into William's chair with a cup of tea. How long do you think it will take them to violate the terms? Based on similar cases? Probably within 72 hours of getting access to the money. Greed doesn't like waiting. Perfect. I'll see you Wednesday for the signing. That night, I dreamed about William. He was sitting in his chair, reading the newspaper as he had every morning for 35 years. You're playing a dangerous game, Bridget, he said without looking up from the business section. They started this game when they decided to steal from me. And you're going to finish it? I'm going to win it. William smiled, the same smile that had first attracted me to him 40 years ago. I always did love your ruthless streak. I woke feeling more peaceful than I had since receiving that accidental text message. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for my son and his wife to demonstrate exactly who they really were, and then watch as the consequences of their choices destroyed everything they thought they were entitled to steal. Wednesday's document signing went exactly as I had hoped. Darius and Shanice arrived at Malcolm's office dressed in their most respectful attire, playing the roles of loving family members concerned about my welfare. They asked thoughtful questions about the account restrictions, nodded seriously at Malcolm's explanations of the usage rules, and signed every document with a kind of careful attention that suggested they understood exactly what they were agreeing to. What they actually understood, of course, was how to circumvent every restriction I had put in place. The account was funded on Friday with exactly $500,000. By Monday morning, the violations had begun. I was having coffee in my sunroom when Monique called with the first report. Mrs. Stanley, I'm afraid we've detected some irregularities with a legacy gift account. What kind of irregularities? Well, on Saturday, there was an attempted cash advance through a third-party app using the account as collateral. The transaction was blocked because it violated the no cash withdrawals clause, but the attempt was logged and flagged. I set down my coffee cup. And yesterday? Yesterday was more concerning. They contacted a Las Vegas casino host about pre-funding chips through what they described as a family trust account. The casino's compliance department declined the transaction and reported it to gaming authorities as a potential structuring attempt. Structuring? Breaking up large transactions to avoid federal reporting requirements. It's a federal crime, Mrs. Stanley. I felt a surge of satisfaction so pure it was almost intoxicating. What else? This morning, Mrs. Shanice Winslow called our customer service line claiming to be you and requesting authorization for wire transfers to multiple Las Vegas casinos. When asked for verification information, she provided your social security number and mother's maiden name. Identity theft. Among other charges, yes. Our compliance department has preserved all recordings and documentation. We've also been in contact with federal authorities as you requested. Federal authorities? Agent Terrell Reed with the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division. He's been monitoring the account since it was established. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon if possible. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a downtown coffee shop with Agent Reed, a serious man in his early 40s who had the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of investigating financial crimes. Mrs. Stanley, I want to be completely transparent with you about what we're seeing here. Your son and daughter-in-law have committed multiple federal crimes in the past 5 days. What kind of crimes? Wire fraud, identity theft, attempted money laundering, and conspiracy. The casino contact alone gives us interstate commerce violations. If they actually travel to Las Vegas with the intent to circumvent your account restrictions, we can add additional charges. I sipped my tea, maintaining the composed exterior that had served me well through 4 decades of corporate wives' meetings and charity board confrontations. What happens next? That depends on what you want to happen next, Mrs. Stanley. We can arrest them now based on what we already have, or we can let them continue and build a more comprehensive case. What would you recommend? Agent Reed leaned forward. Honestly, let them go to Las Vegas. Let them try to launder the money through the casinos. Let them dig their hole deeper. The more evidence we have of premeditation and sophisticated planning, the more serious the charges and the longer the sentences. And they will go to Las Vegas? Mrs. Stanley, in my experience, people who commit these kinds of financial crimes can't help themselves. They always escalate. They always think they're smarter than the system, and they always get caught. That evening, Darius called to thank me again for the incredibly generous gift. Shanice and I are so grateful, Mom. We're actually planning a trip to celebrate. How wonderful. Where are you thinking of going? Well, we thought Las Vegas might be fun. You know, shows, restaurants, maybe a little gambling for entertainment. That sounds perfect. When are you leaving? Next weekend, actually. We found a great hotel package deal. I'm so happy you're able to use the gift for something that will create wonderful memories. After hanging up, I called Malcolm to report the conversation. They're definitely going, I said. Next weekend. Perfect. Agent Reed has coordinated with Nevada Gaming Control and Las Vegas Metro Police. The moment they try to circumvent the account restrictions or misrepresent the source of funds, they'll be arrested. How long does this kind of case usually take to prosecute? With the evidence we're building? 6 to 8 months from arrest to sentencing. And Mrs. Stanley? Based on the charges they're accumulating, we're looking at significant prison time. How significant? Federal sentencing guidelines for this type of financial fraud typically result in 3 to 5 years. If they commit additional crimes in Las Vegas, it could be longer. That night, I sat in William's chair and thought about the path that had led us to this point. Some people might say I was being too harsh, too calculated, too vengeful. They might argue that I should have simply confronted Darius and Shanice directly, that I should have tried family counseling or mediation. Those people had never been called a miserable old woman by their own child. They had never discovered that the baby they had raised, loved, and sacrificed for was planning to steal their future and abandon them to institutional care. I had given Darius every opportunity to be the man I had raised him to be. I had offered him respect, dignity, and even financial support. His response had been to plan my imprisonment and the theft of everything William and I had built together. Now he would learn that actions have consequences, and that some consequences last for years. My phone buzzed with a text message from Shanice. "Thank you again for the amazing gift. Can't wait to show you photos from our Vegas trip." I smiled and typed back, "Have a wonderful time, dear. I can't wait to hear all about your adventures." What I didn't tell her was that Agent Reed would be hearing about their adventures first, and that their adventures would likely end with handcuffs, court appearances, and federal prison sentences. Some gifts keep giving long after they're opened. This one was about to give them both a lesson in consequences that would last for years to come. The week before their Las Vegas departure, Darius and Shanice's behavior became increasingly suspicious and increasingly incriminating. According to Agent Reed's daily reports, they were leaving what he called a trail of federal crimes that would make prosecution almost laughably easy. On Tuesday, they attempted to use the legacy gift account as collateral for a $50,000 casino credit line, lying on the application about the source and nature of the funds. On Wednesday, they tried to convert account funds into cryptocurrency using a complex series of transfers through multiple platforms. On Thursday, Shanice called the bank again, this time claiming to be my caregiver and requesting authorization to wire money directly to casino cages in Las Vegas. Each attempt was blocked by the account restrictions, and each attempt was carefully documented by Monique's compliance team and forwarded to federal investigators. "They're not just committing crimes," Agent Reed told me during our Friday morning briefing. "They're committing crimes with a level of premeditation and sophistication that will make this a federal prosecutor's dream case." Sophisticated? The cryptocurrency layering attempt alone shows knowledge of money laundering techniques. The false identity claims demonstrate intent to commit identity theft. The casino credit applications prove they were planning to circumvent your gift restrictions from the beginning. I nodded, sipping my coffee in the downtown restaurant where we had begun meeting regularly. "And their Las Vegas trip? We'll be watching every move they make." Khalil Hart from Nevada Gaming Control has coordinated surveillance with casino security. The moment they try to access funds in violation of your account terms, or the moment they misrepresent the source of their money to gaming authorities, we'll have grounds for arrest. Will the arrests be public? Agent Reed smiled grimly. "Mrs. Stanley, arrests for financial crimes at Las Vegas casinos tend to attract media attention. Your son and daughter-in-law are about to become very famous for all the wrong reasons." That afternoon, Darius called to update me on their travel plans. "We're flying out tomorrow morning, Mom. The hotel upgraded us to a suite." "How exciting. What hotel are you staying at?" "The Bellagio. Shanice has always wanted to stay there." "I'm so pleased you're able to use the gift for something special. Will you be doing much gambling?" "Maybe a little. Just for fun, you know." "Of course. Just remember the account restrictions, sweetheart. No cash withdrawals or transfers to other accounts." "Don't worry, Mom. We'll follow all the rules." The irony of that statement was almost overwhelming. They had been violating rules since the moment the account was funded, and they were about to violate federal law in the most spectacular way possible. After hanging up, I called Malcolm to confirm our legal strategy for the aftermath. Once they're arrested, what happens to the remaining money in the account? The account terms specify that any violation results in immediate forfeiture of all remaining funds. The money reverts to your estate, and they lose any claim to it. And the criminal charges? Based on what Agent Reed has described, we're looking at wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of fraudulently obtained funds. The federal sentencing guidelines suggest 3 to 7 years in prison, depending on the amounts involved and their criminal history. They don't have a criminal history. They do now. Saturday morning, I woke early and prepared for what I knew would be a momentous day. I dressed carefully in my dove gray suit and pearls, as if I were preparing for an important business meeting. In a sense, This was the culmination of months of careful planning and legal preparation. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. Agent Reed. Mrs. Stanley, your son and daughter-in-law have just landed in Las Vegas. We have them under surveillance. What happens next? We wait. Based on their previous behavior, they'll attempt to violate the account terms within hours of checking into their hotel. Probably sooner. How will you know when they violate the terms? Khalil Hart has coordinated with casino compliance departments throughout the city. Any attempt to access your account funds, any misrepresentation of the source of funds, any attempt to circumvent the restrictions will trigger immediate notification to federal authorities. I spent the rest of the day in my garden, tending to William's roses and trying to maintain my composure while waiting for the call that would end this chapter of my life forever. At 4:17 p.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Stanley, it's Agent Reed. We have them. What did they do? They attempted to declare $500,000 in unrestricted family gift funds at the Bellagio casino cage. When asked for documentation, they provided forged letters claiming the money was an inheritance with no restrictions. They also attempted to purchase $100,000 in casino chips using wire transfers from your legacy gift account. And they were arrested 20 minutes ago for wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements to gaming authorities. The arrest was recorded by casino security cameras and will be available to media outlets within the hour. I sat down in William's chair, overwhelmed by a sense of completion that I hadn't felt since the day he died. What happens now? They'll be processed by Las Vegas Metro Police, then transferred to federal custody. Initial appearance is scheduled for Monday morning. Based on flight risk and the interstate nature of the crimes, I expect they'll be held without bail pending trial. How long until trial? Federal cases typically take 6 to 8 months to come to trial. But Mrs. Stanley, with the evidence we have, I expect they'll plead guilty long before we reach trial. The evidence is overwhelming, and their attorneys will advise them that fighting the charges would only result in longer sentences. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of champagne, the bottle William had been saving for our 40th wedding anniversary, which we'd never had the chance to celebrate. To justice, I said aloud, toasting the empty room and the memory of my husband. And to the lesson that actions have consequences. An hour later, my phone started ringing with calls from reporters who had gotten wind of the arrests. I let them all go to voicemail. There would be time later to decide how much of this story I wanted to share with the world. For now, it was enough to sit in the home that I had protected, surrounded by the life that William and I had built together, knowing that the people who had tried to steal it from me were spending their first night in federal custody. Some people call it revenge. I called it mathematics, a precise calculation of actions and consequences that balanced perfectly. The equation was finally complete. The details of Darius and Shanice's arrest came to me in fragments over the following days, pieced together from Agent Reed's reports, news coverage, and casino security footage that would later become evidence in their federal trial. They had checked into their Bellagio suite at 2 p.m. on Saturday, barely taking time to unpack before heading to the casino floor. Khalil Hart, the Nevada gaming control investigator, had positioned himself with a clear view of the high-limit gaming area, while FBI agents monitored from the surveillance room above. What happened next was a masterclass in self-destruction. At 3:45 p.m., Darius approached the casino cage with a confidence that would have been admirable if it weren't so misplaced. He requested $100,000 in chips, presenting documentation that claimed the funds were from an unrestricted family inheritance, with no limitations or oversight requirements. The cage manager, trained to spot exactly this kind of financial misrepresentation, asked for additional verification. That's when Shanice produced the forged letters, documents she had created using my letterhead and a digital copy of my signature, claiming that I had given them complete discretionary access to my estate funds. Mrs. Stanley, Agent Reed told me during our Monday morning debrief, they didn't just violate your account restrictions. They committed multiple federal felonies in front of casino security cameras while talking to gaming control officers. What exactly did they say? According to the recordings, your son told the cage manager that you were in early-stage dementia and had signed over financial authority to them. Your daughter-in-law added that you were too confused to manage your own money and that they were protecting your assets by investing them properly. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only had they planned to steal from me and abandon me to institutional care, but they were now claiming I was mentally incompetent to justify their theft. The casino cage manager immediately flagged the transaction as suspicious, Agent Reed continued. When they were asked to provide medical documentation of your alleged incapacity, they became agitated and demanded to speak to supervisors. And that's when you moved in? That's when Khalil Hart approached them. He identified himself as Nevada Gaming Control and requested all documentation related to the source of their funds. When they couldn't provide legitimate proof of ownership, they were detained for questioning. The questioning had lasted less than an hour. Faced with casino security footage, recorded conversations, and banking records that showed their repeated violations of the account restrictions, they had immediately begun blaming each other. Your son claimed the whole scheme was his wife's idea, Agent Reed said. Your daughter-in-law claimed she was just following his instructions. Neither took responsibility for the forged documents or the false statements about your mental capacity. They were arrested at 6:30 p.m., handcuffed in the casino lobby while other guests stopped to stare and take photos. The arrest was recorded by multiple witnesses and uploaded to social media within minutes. By Sunday morning, the story had been picked up by local news outlets. Mother and son arrested in Las Vegas casino fraud scheme. By Monday, it had gone national. Family members accused of stealing from elderly mother to fund gambling trip. I watched the coverage from my living room, seeing Darius and Shanice in their orange jumpsuits during their initial court appearance. They looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the weight of their choices and the reality of federal prosecution. The charges were read with clinical precision: wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, and making false statements to federal investigators. The prosecutor requested that they be held without bail, citing flight risk and the premeditated nature of their crimes. Malcolm called during the court proceedings to update me on the civil implications. The account forfeiture clause has been triggered by their violations, he said. All remaining funds, approximately $387,000, revert to your estate immediately. They have no legal claim to any of it. And the criminal case? Based on the evidence, their attorneys will almost certainly recommend plea agreements. Federal prosecutors have a 95% conviction rate in cases like this, and the evidence against them is overwhelming. What kind of sentences are we looking at? Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 4 to 6 years for first-time offenders in financial fraud cases of this magnitude. However, the elder abuse charges and the sophistication of their scheme could result in longer sentences. That afternoon, I received my first direct communication from Darius since his arrest, a collect call from the Federal Detention Center in Las Vegas. Mom, please, you have to help us. This is all a misunderstanding. We never meant to steal from you. His voice was different, smaller, desperate, stripped of the casual entitlement that had characterized our relationship for years. Darius, I said calmly, you called me a miserable old woman and planned to put me in a nursing home so you could steal my money for gambling trips. Which part of that was a misunderstanding? That text wasn't meant for you to see. But I did see it. And then I watched you lie to casinos about my mental capacity and forge documents with my signature. What part of that was unintentional? Silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of other inmates talking in the background. "We can make this right," he said finally. "We'll pay back every penny. We'll go to counseling. We'll do whatever you want. What I wanted was for you to be the man I raised you to be. What I wanted was for you to care about my welfare instead of planning to steal from me. It's too late for what I wanted, Darius. You can't let us go to prison. We're your family." I looked around my living room, at the photos of William and me on our wedding day, at the books we had read together, at the life we had built through 40 years of love and mutual respect. Family doesn't try to steal from each other, Darius. Family doesn't call their mothers miserable old women. Family doesn't forge signatures and lie to federal investigators. Please. I hung up and immediately called the detention center to inform them that I would not be accepting any more collect calls from either Darius or Shanice. That evening, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sun set behind William's roses. The trap had worked perfectly. The evidence was overwhelming. Justice would be served. But more than that, I was free. Free from the fear of being discarded and robbed by my own child. Free from the pretense of loving someone who saw me only as an obstacle to wealth. Free from the burden of hoping that people would become better than they had chosen to be. Some people call it harsh. I called it liberation. My phone rang. Malcolm's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Bridget, I just heard from the federal prosecutor. They want to discuss plea agreements for both defendants. The evidence is so strong that fighting the charges would only result in longer sentences." "What kind of plea arrangements?" "Guilty pleas to all charges in exchange for the lower end of the sentencing guidelines. 4 years in federal prison for each of them, plus restitution and permanent no-contact orders. 4 years. By the time they were released, I would be 68. Old enough to have forgotten their faces, young enough to enjoy the peace of their absence. "That seems appropriate," I said. "There's one more thing, Bridget. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to provide a victim impact statement for the sentencing hearing." I smiled, thinking about all the things I could say about the impact of discovering that your only child sees you as a miserable old woman whose money would be better spent in Las Vegas casinos. "I'd be delighted to address the court," I said, "because some stories deserve to be told in full, with all their harsh truths and inevitable consequences. And some lessons need to be delivered by the people who are supposed to love you most." The weeks following Darius and Shanice's arrest unfolded with the methodical precision of well-designed legal machinery. As Malcolm had predicted, their attorneys quickly realized that fighting the federal charges would only result in harsher sentences and higher legal fees that neither defendant could afford. The evidence against them was, in Agent Reed's words, prosecutorial gold. Casino security footage showing them making false statements to gaming officials. Recorded phone calls where they discussed circumventing my account restrictions. Bank records documenting their repeated violations of the gift terms. Forged documents bearing my signature and letterhead. And most damaging of all, their own recorded statements claiming I was mentally incompetent while they were simultaneously stealing from me. They built their own prison. Prosecutor Nia Lang told me during our pre-trial meeting. Every crime was documented, every lie was recorded, every fraud was preserved by their own actions. At 39, Nia Lang was the kind of federal prosecutor who had built her career on complex financial crimes. Sharp, relentless, and completely uninterested in sob stories from defendants who thought family relationships should exempt them from consequences. "What kind of plea arrangement are their attorneys requesting?" I asked. "Standard federal guidelines for first-time financial fraud offenders. 4 years in prison, 5 years of supervised probation, complete restitution, and permanent no-contact orders protecting you from any future contact or harassment. And if they refuse the plea arrangement, Then we go to trial, and they face enhanced sentences for forcing the government to prove charges that are already documented beyond any reasonable doubt. We're looking at 7 to 10 years instead of 4. I nodded, impressed by the mathematical precision of federal justice. What do you need from me for the plea hearings? A victim impact statement would be powerful, Mrs. Stanley. The court needs to understand not just the financial crimes, but the emotional impact of being betrayed by family members you trusted. I'd be happy to provide that. The plea hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving both defendants time to fully consider the consequences of their choices. During that time, I received several attempts at communication from their attorneys, all of which I forwarded to Malcolm without reading. They're trying to negotiate around the no-contact orders, Malcolm explained. Their lawyers want to preserve some possibility of future relationship restoration. Absolutely not. I told them that was your position. Permanent means permanent in this case. 3 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected call from Shanice's mother, Patricia. We had never been close. She had always viewed me as insufficiently supportive of her daughter's expensive tastes, but I was surprised by the venom in her voice. You destroyed my daughter's life, she said without preamble. Over money. Over nothing but money. Patricia, I replied calmly, your daughter destroyed her own life when she decided to steal from me and forge my signature to cover it up. She made a mistake. People make mistakes. She made a series of calculated choices over several weeks. She lied to federal investigators. She claimed I was mentally incompetent to justify her theft. Those aren't mistakes, they're crimes. You could drop the charges. You could show mercy. I walked to my window and looked out at the garden where William and I had planned our retirement, the same garden that Darius and Shanice had been planning to sell so they could fund their gambling habits. Patricia, would you show mercy to someone who tried to steal your house and put you in a nursing home? That's different. It's exactly the same. Your daughter saw my love for her as weakness and my trust as opportunity. She chose to exploit both. Those choices have consequences. The plea hearing took place on a cold December morning in the federal courthouse downtown. I arrived early, wearing my best charcoal wool suit and the pearl necklace that had become my armor through this entire ordeal. Darius and Shanice were brought in wearing standard detention clothing, orange jumpsuits that made them both look younger and more vulnerable than I remembered. They were seated at separate defense tables, their attorneys having determined that their interests were sufficiently divergent to require separate representation. When they saw me in the gallery, Shanice looked away immediately, but Darius stared with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, perhaps. Or regret. Or simply the mathematical assessment of someone who had gambled everything on a bad bet and lost. Judge Rebecca Morrison called the court to order and reviewed the charges with clinical precision. Wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, making false statements to federal investigators. Each charge carried significant penalties, and each charge was supported by overwhelming evidence. Mr. Winslow, Judge Morrison addressed Darius first. How do you plead to the charge of wire fraud in the first degree? Guilty, Your Honor. His voice was barely audible. And to the charge of elder financial abuse. Guilty. The litany continued for both defendants, each guilty plea another confirmation that the trap I had set had worked exactly as designed. But it was during the victim impact portion of the hearing that I delivered the words I had been crafting since that first accidental text message 9 months earlier. Your Honor, the defendants didn't just steal money from me. They stole my peace of mind, my trust in family relationships, and my ability to feel safe in my own home. When my son called me a miserable old woman and planned to abandon me to institutional care, he wasn't just planning financial theft. He was planning to erase the woman who gave him life. I paused, looking directly at both defendants. What makes this particularly painful is that I would have given them anything they needed if they had simply asked with honesty and respect. Instead, they chose deception, fraud, and cruelty. They chose to see me as an obstacle to be removed rather than a mother to be loved. Shanice was crying now, but they seemed like tears of self-pity rather than genuine remorse. I ask this court to impose the full penalties allowed by law, not out of vengeance, but out of protection. Protection for other elderly parents who trust their children. Protection for other families who might be targeted by similar schemes. And protection for me, so that I can live the remainder of my life without fear of further exploitation by people who are supposed to love me. Judge Morrison thanked me for my statement and moved to sentencing. Mr. Darius Winslow and Mrs. Shanice Winslow, you have pleaded guilty to serious federal crimes that demonstrate a callous disregard for family bonds and the welfare of an elderly victim. Your actions were not impulsive mistakes, but calculated schemes designed to defraud a woman who trusted you. She consulted her notes. I sentence each of you to 4 years in federal prison, to be followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are jointly and severally liable for restitution in the amount of $113,000 representing legal fees, investigation costs, and emotional damages. And you are permanently barred from any contact with the victim, directly or indirectly, for the rest of her natural life. The gavels fell with a finality that felt like closing a book I never wanted to read again. As they were led away in handcuffs, Darius looked back at me one more time. This time I could read his expression clearly. It was the look of someone who had finally understood the true cost of his choices. Beautiful souls, I need to pause here and speak directly to anyone who's ever been betrayed by family members you trusted with your whole heart. Your pain is valid, your anger is justified, and your need to protect yourself is not selfish. It's survival. Sometimes the people who share our DNA are the ones who hurt us deepest, and that's a special kind of heartbreak that few people understand. But remember, you are stronger than their betrayal, and you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity by everyone in your life, especially family. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, has helped thousands of people heal from family betrayal and build lives filled with people who truly value them. Click the link in the description and start your healing journey today. Please subscribe for more incredible stories of resilience, and remember, you get to choose who deserves access to your love and trust. The months following the plea hearing were the quietest I had experienced since William's death. The legal machinery ground forward with reassuring predictability. Appeals were filed and denied. Restitution payments began arriving in my account, and the no-contact orders were filed with local law enforcement agencies. But it was the silence that I treasured most. No more manipulative phone calls asking for money. No more visits where I was assessed like a piece of property to be liquidated. No more watching people I loved calculate the value of my life against their desires for luxury and entertainment. I used the quiet months to reclaim parts of myself that had been lost during the years of Darius's growing entitlement and Shanice's barely concealed resentment. I learned to paint watercolors. I joined a book club. I traveled to Scotland, where William and I had always planned to visit but never found the time. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. The same instincts that had told me something was wrong with my son's marriage, something artificial about Shanice's affection, something calculating about their sudden interest in my living situation. Malcolm called on a Tuesday morning in May with news that the federal sentences were being implemented. Darius was transferred to a federal prison in Oregon yesterday. Shanice is at a facility in California. Both will serve at least 85% of their 4-year sentences before being eligible for supervised release. So, approximately 3 years and 4 months. Correct. And Bridget? Their appeals have been exhausted. This is final. I set down my coffee and walked to the window, looking out at the roses William and I had planted for our 20th anniversary. They were blooming magnificently this year, fed by nutrients from the composted remains of last year's garden. Malcolm, there's something I want to discuss with you about my estate planning. Of course. What did you have in mind? I want to ensure that even if the no-contact orders are somehow overturned in the future, there's no possibility of Darius or Shanice ever benefiting from my estate. We can certainly strengthen those provisions. Are you thinking of a complete disinheritance? More than that, I want to create a trust that specifically excludes them and their descendants in perpetuity. I want language that makes it impossible for any future court to overturn my wishes, regardless of any claims about mental capacity or undue influence. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. That's quite comprehensive, Bridget. Are you certain? I thought about the text message that had started this entire ordeal, about the casual cruelty of being called a miserable old woman by someone I had raised with love and sacrifice, about the coldness in Shanice's eyes when she thought I was too confused to manage my own affairs. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The new trust documents were completed within 2 weeks. Every penny of my estate, which had actually grown substantially since eliminating the financial drain of Darius and Shanice's constant requests for money, would go to charities focused on elder care and protection. But the most satisfying provision was the specific language that named both Darius and Shanice as persons who have demonstrated through their actions that they are unfit to benefit from the decedent's generosity. The trust included copies of their criminal convictions, transcripts of their court proceedings, and detailed documentation of their fraud schemes. Any future attempt to challenge the trust would require a court to review the evidence of their crimes and determine whether people who had stolen from me and lied about my mental capacity deserved to inherit my money. It was, Malcolm noted with professional admiration, legally bulletproof and personally devastating. That summer, I received a letter from Darius's prison chaplain asking if I would consider visiting or at least accepting a letter of apology from my son. I declined politely but firmly. Some people believe that forgiveness is always the right choice, that family bonds should survive any betrayal, that time heals all wounds. Those people have never been seen as a miserable old woman whose only value was the money she could provide for other people's entertainment. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not the same thing as reconciliation. I could forgive Darius for being weak, selfish, and cruel without pretending that those qualities made him someone I wanted in my life. The boy I had raised was gone if he had ever truly existed. The man in federal prison was a stranger who happened to share my DNA and some childhood memories that now felt like stories about someone else's life. In September, I received an unexpected call from Agent Reed. Mrs. Stanley, I wanted to let you know that your case has been used as a training example for other financial crimes investigators. The way you documented the evidence and coordinated with multiple agencies, it's being taught as a model for how to build airtight cases against family financial predators. I'm glad something positive came from the experience. More than you might realize. We've already had 3 other cases where elderly victims used similar strategies to document and prosecute family members who were attempting financial exploitation. Your approach is saving people from becoming victims. After hanging up, I realized that this outcome was more satisfying than any personal revenge could have been. Darius and Shanice hadn't just destroyed their own lives, they had provided a blueprint for protecting other potential victims from similar schemes. Their greed had become a cautionary tale. Their crimes had become evidence in training materials. Their sentences had become precedents for future prosecutions. They had achieved a kind of immortality, just not the kind they had been hoping for. That evening, I opened a bottle of champagne, not to celebrate their suffering, but to celebrate my freedom. Freedom from fear, from manipulation, from the exhausting work of loving people who saw that love as weakness to be exploited. I raised my glass to the empty room and spoke aloud the words I had been saving for this moment. To William, who taught me to plan carefully. To Malcolm, who taught me to protect legally. And to Darius and Shanice, who taught me that some relationships are too expensive to maintain. The champagne was excellent. The silence was even better. As autumn settled over my garden, I received what would be the final legal communication regarding Darius and Shanice's case. The restitution payments had been completed. Every penny of legal fees, investigation costs, and punitive damages had been recovered from their seized assets and garnished wages from their prison jobs. More symbolically important was the thick envelope from the federal courthouse containing certified copies of the permanent restraining orders. The documents, impressive in their legal thoroughness, banned both defendants from any form of contact with me for the remainder of my natural life. No phone calls. No letters.
No emails.
No third-party communications. No approaching within 500 feet of my home, my bank, my attorney's office, or any location where I might reasonably be expected to be present. Violation of these orders would result in immediate federal prosecution and additional prison time. I filed the documents in my fireproof safe, next to my will, birth certificate, and the screenshot of that original text message that had started this entire chain of events. Archaeological layers of my life, documenting the transformation from trusting mother to protected woman. Malcolm called that afternoon with final case updates. The paperwork is complete, Bridget. They're officially out of your life forever from a legal standpoint. And from a practical standpoint, federal prison inmates serve 85% of their sentences. With good behavior, they might be released in 3 years and 2 months. But even then, they'll be under supervised probation for 5 additional years, during which any violation of the no-contact orders would send them back to federal prison immediately. What about after the probation period ends? The restraining orders are permanent. They expire only upon your death. Even if they live to be 90 years old, they'll never be legally allowed to contact you. I found this prospect deeply satisfying. Not because I wanted them to suffer indefinitely, but because I wanted to live the rest of my life without looking over my shoulder for people who had already proven they would steal from me if given the opportunity. There's one more thing, Malcolm continued. I've prepared a document that might interest you. A comprehensive analysis of how much money you saved by eliminating them from your life. How much money? Based on their historical requests for loans, gifts, and financial assistance, most of which were never repaid, you've saved approximately $1.2 million over the past 10 years. That's not including what they would have cost you in nursing home fees, legal fees to fight their control over your affairs, and the eventual theft of your entire estate. The mathematics were staggering. By protecting myself from their financial exploitation, I had essentially gained over $1 million in assets that would have otherwise disappeared into their gambling habits, luxury purchases, and general financial irresponsibility. So the money I spent on legal fees and investigation costs was the best investment you ever made. You spent roughly $100,000 to protect $2.8 million in assets and eliminate $1.2 million in future losses. From a purely financial perspective, it was extraordinarily cost-effective. That evening, I prepared what would be my final meal alone in the house where I had raised Darius. Tomorrow, I would be moving to a smaller, more manageable home in a community designed for active adults who wanted independence without the burden of large property maintenance. The new house was beautiful, a craftsman-style home with a perfect garden and no memories of children who grew up to steal from their parents. I had purchased it with cash, using money that would have otherwise gone to fund Darius and Shanice's Vegas gambling trips. As I packed the last of my belongings, I found a photo album from Darius's childhood. Page after page of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations, and school events. A comprehensive record of a mother's love and a child's apparent happiness. Looking at those photos now was like looking at evidence from a crime scene. Not because the love hadn't been real, but because it had been so thoroughly betrayed that it felt like something that had happened to someone else. I closed the album and placed it in a box marked storage. Not because I plan to look at it again, but because some evidence should be preserved even when it's too painful to examine. The moving truck arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. By noon, my old life had been loaded and transported to my new address, where I would begin the next chapter of my story. The chapter where I was the only author, the only editor, and the only person who got to decide how it ended. My new neighbors were welcoming, without being intrusive. My new routine was peaceful, without being boring. My new life was mine, without being lonely. I had learned something important during the months of legal proceedings and federal investigations. The opposite of being exploited by family isn't being isolated from everyone. The opposite of being exploited by family is being selective about who gets access to your love, your trust, and your resources. 3 weeks after moving in, I received a call from Patricia, Shanice's mother. "Bridget, I wanted to apologize for what I said during the legal proceedings. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you." "I understand, Patricia. It's hard to accept that someone you love is capable of such cruelty. She's my daughter. I had to defend her, even when I knew she was wrong. And she was your daughter. I had to protect myself, even when it meant destroying her future. Do you think—" Patricia's voice trailed off. "Do you think there's any chance they might change? That prison might help them understand what they did wrong." I looked out at my new garden, where I was planning to plant roses next spring. Different roses, in a different configuration, creating something beautiful without carrying the weight of complicated history. "Patricia, I hope they find peace and wisdom in whatever time they have left. But I won't be around to find out whether they do." "You really mean never to see them again?" "I mean never to be vulnerable to them again. There's a difference." After hanging up, I realized that this conversation had felt more like closure than any of the court proceedings or legal documents. Not because Patricia and I had found some kind of reconciliation, but because I had been able to articulate something important about the choices I had made. I hadn't destroyed Darius and Shanice out of revenge, though revenge had certainly been satisfying. I had destroyed them out of protection for myself, and protection for other potential victims who might learn from their example. Some people are born predators. Some people become predators through circumstances and choices. But all predators have one thing in common. They rely on their victims' hope that love can change them. I had finally learned to stop hoping and start protecting. The lesson had cost me a son and a daughter-in-law, but it had gained me something more valuable, a life free from the fear of being betrayed by people who were supposed to love me. Mathematics, not emotion. Consequences, not forgiveness. Protection, not hope. The equation had finally balanced in my favor. 2 years have passed since Darius and Shanice were sentenced to federal prison, and I can honestly say these have been the most peaceful years of my adult life. I write this final chapter from my sunroom in the house that they will never see, surrounded by the garden they will never exploit, living a life they can never again threaten. The transformation has been remarkable, not just in terms of my daily routine, but in my fundamental relationship with trust, security, and family. I had not realized how much energy I had been spending for years, decades, really, managing Darius's entitlement, deflecting Shanice's manipulations, and trying to love people who saw that love as a resource to be mined rather than a gift to be treasured. My new life is structured around pleasure rather than obligation. I wake when I choose. I travel when I want. I spend my money on things that bring me joy rather than on people who demand it as their right. I have discovered watercolor painting, joined a photography club, and learned to grow orchids in my greenhouse. Most importantly, I have learned to trust my instincts about people again. The same instincts that warned me about Shanice's false warmth and Darius's growing coldness now guide me toward relationships that are reciprocal, honest, and genuinely caring. I have made new friends, People who appreciate my company without calculating my net worth, who invite me to dinner without expecting me to pay for everyone's meal, who remember my birthday because they care about me rather than because they want gifts. The financial benefits of eliminating toxic family members from my life have been substantial as well. Malcolm's calculations were conservative. Over the past 2 years, I estimate I have saved nearly $400,000 that would have otherwise gone to emergencies, investments, and opportunities that inevitably benefited only Darius and Shanice. My investment portfolio has grown by 18% annually since I stopped funding their lifestyle. My charitable giving has increased substantially, supporting organizations that protect elderly people from financial exploitation. I have even endowed a small scholarship fund for law students specializing in elder abuse cases. But the real measure of my success isn't financial. It's the complete absence of anxiety about being manipulated, exploited, or betrayed by people who claim to love me. Last month, I received a letter from Agent Reed informing me that my case had been featured in a federal law enforcement training manual as an example of victim-initiated investigation and evidence preservation. Apparently, the methodical way I documented Darius and Shanice's crimes has become a template for other potential victims of family financial fraud. Your approach has resulted in 12 additional prosecutions in similar cases, he wrote. Elderly victims are using your strategy to protect themselves and build cases against family members who attempt financial exploitation. I found this deeply satisfying. Darius and Shanice had not only destroyed their own lives, they had created a blueprint for justice that was protecting other people from experiencing the same betrayal. Their greed had become a cautionary tale taught in law enforcement academies. Their crimes had become precedents cited in court cases. Their sentences had become warnings to other potential family predators. They had achieved a certain immortality, though not the kind they had been hoping for. 3 weeks ago, I had an encounter that reminded me how completely my life has changed. I was at the farmer's market, selecting peaches, when I overheard a woman my age talking to her adult daughter about financial difficulties. "Mom, if you would just let us manage your accounts, we could help you invest more aggressively," the daughter was saying. "You're being too conservative. You're missing opportunities." The mother looked uncertain, apologetic. "I don't know, honey. I'm comfortable with my current arrangements." "But Mom, we could help you make so much more money. And we could handle all the complicated paperwork for you. Wouldn't that be easier?" I recognized the tone, the pressure, the underlying assumption that the older woman was too stupid or too scared to manage her own affairs. It was the same tone Shanice had used when suggesting I needed help with my finances. Without really planning to, I approached them. "Excuse me," I said to the older woman. "I couldn't help overhearing, and I wondered if you might be interested in the name of an excellent independent financial advisor. Someone who works for you rather than with family members who might have conflicting interests." The daughter's expression shifted immediately. "We're having a private conversation." "Of course," I said pleasantly. "I just thought you should know that the most expensive financial advice often comes from people who love you." I handed the mother my business card. I had started carrying cards with Malcolm's contact information for exactly these situations, and walked away. An hour later, the woman called me. Her name was Dorothy, and she had been feeling pressured by her son and daughter to consolidate her assets under their management. After hearing my story, a carefully edited version that focused on protection rather than prosecution, she decided to maintain control of her own finances and establish legal safeguards against family financial manipulation. It was a small victory, but it reinforced my understanding that the best revenge against people who exploit trust is to make it harder for them to find victims. Yesterday marked exactly 2 years since Darius and Shanice were sentenced. I celebrated by having lunch at my favorite restaurant, buying myself a beautiful piece of jewelry, and spending the evening reading in my garden. I did not think about them at all until I was writing this final chapter. They have 18 months left on their federal sentences, followed by 5 years of supervised probation during which any violation of the no-contact orders would send them back to prison immediately. Even after probation ends, the restraining orders remain in effect for the rest of my life. I will be 66 when they are released. They will be 38 and 35 respectively, young enough to rebuild their lives if they choose to learn from their mistakes, old enough to understand the permanent consequences of their choices. I hope they find peace, wisdom, and honest work. I hope they learn to build relationships based on genuine affection rather than financial opportunity. I hope they discover that the most valuable things in life cannot be stolen, gambled away, or converted into casino chips. But I will not be around to witness their redemption if it comes. And I am completely at peace with that choice. Some people believe that forgiveness requires reconciliation, that family bonds should survive any betrayal, that time heals all wounds. I have learned that forgiveness can exist without reconciliation, that some family bonds become too expensive to maintain, and that some wounds heal better when you stop picking at them. I forgave Darius and Shanice the moment I stopped hoping they would become different people than they had chosen to be. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean giving them another opportunity to exploit my trust. They called me a miserable old woman and planned to steal everything I had worked for. I responded by ensuring they would never have another chance to hurt me or anyone else in my family. The mathematics of that exchange work perfectly in my favor. This morning, I woke in my beautiful home, surrounded by my chosen possessions, anticipating a day filled with activities I enjoy and people I genuinely care about. I will spend the afternoon painting watercolors in my studio, have dinner with friends who value my company, and fall asleep knowing that tomorrow will be equally peaceful and secure. Meanwhile, Darius and Shanice will wake in federal prison, where they will spend another 18 months paying for their choices before beginning 5 years of supervised probation during which any contact with me will send them back to their cells. Some people call it harsh. I call it justice. Some people call it revenge. I call it protection. Some people call it unforgiving. I call it mathematical, a precise calculation of actions and consequences that has finally balanced in my favor. My name is Bridget Stanley. I am 64 years old, and I am living proof that it's never too late to stop being a victim and start being the architect of your own protection. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them immediately. When someone threatens your security, eliminate the threat permanently. When someone tries to steal your future, make sure they pay for it with their own. And when someone calls you a miserable old woman, show them what a truly formidable woman looks like when she stops playing defense and starts playing to win. The game is over. I won. And I've never been happier to collect my winnings. Beautiful souls, as Bridget's story comes to an end, I want you to remember something powerful. You are never too old to be fierce, never too vulnerable to be victorious, and never too trusting to learn protection. Bridget's strength didn't come from hatred. It came from self-respect. She refused to accept betrayal as the price of family relationships, and she showed us all what it looks like when a woman decides her peace is worth more than other people's comfort. If you're dealing with toxic family members or anyone who treats your love like a resource to be exploited, remember that you have more power than you know. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, will help you find that power and use it to build the life you deserve. Click the link in the description. Your transformation starts now. Please subscribe for more incredible stories of women who refuse to be victims, and remember, your story is still being written, and you get to decide who deserves to be in it.